Okay, it's about 2:03, so I think we're going to go ahead and get started. Um, we thanks so much for joining us for today's webinar. Over the next 30 minutes or so, Jonathan Margulies, Managing Director of Winterberry Group, will discuss the findings of research they conducted based on feedback from more than 200 senior restaurant marketers that was just released today. Um, the research, which was conducted in partnership with Fishbowl and Coca-Cola, aims to help restaurant marketers better understand the developments that are pacing true innovation in their industry, provide actionable insights into what market leaders are doing well, and provide a roadmap to help others better plan their efforts and investments over the years to come. Before we hand it over to Jonathan to get started, we just need to go over a few administrative items. All participants' microphones are automatically on mute, so you don't need to worry about that. If you have a question along the way, please submit it in the questions section on your GoToWebinar control panel, and we'll work to address it at the end of the webinar. At the end of the webinar, we'll also provide a copy of the webinar presentation along with the report in the handout section of the GoToWebinar control panel. But if you're unable to download those there, don't worry about it. We'll also provide the documents along with a recording of this webinar in an email we'll send to you tomorrow. Finally, in an effort to make this webinar a little more interactive, we're going to conduct a few brief anonymous polls throughout the presentation to see if you can guess some of the results of the research. When these come up, just make your selection and we'll show you the results of the research before we move on. Okay, so with that, I'd like to introduce Jonathan Margulies. Thanks for joining us, Jonathan.
Thank you very much, Heidi, and thanks to those of you who are taking some time out of your busy day to join us. We know it's valuable, and we promise that in a relatively short period of time, we're gonna share quite a bit of information, hopefully help you in planning your marketing and other initiatives as you think about what the new year holds. By way of formal introduction, as Heidi said, my name is Jonathan Margulies. I'm a managing director at Winterberry Group. We are a strategy consulting and research firm based in New York City that works exclusively in and around the disciplines of marketing and advertising. Our clients are suppliers to the industry, agencies, data companies, marketing technology firms, and other folks that essentially represent the supply chain of the marketing world. And our clients are marketers themselves, with whom we work to evolve the marketing function and actually really transform it so that marketers are taking maximum advantage of new tools like data, new systems like marketing technology and the like, to keep pace with the marketplace that's changing radically. We also conduct a pretty significant amount of research in conjunction with partners like Coca-Cola and Fishbowl and with other trade associations and other sponsors in the industry, where we think there's an opportunity to leverage learnings to advance understanding of complex questions, where we think that that some of the sort of usual suspects from a research perspective may not be providing the fullest picture, and where we think there's the most change happening in our sectors right now. Coca-Cola and Fishbowl reached out to us early in the year, and they articulated a research need based upon their perspectives that we had been seeing as well. And they ultimately come down to a few topics, which I'm going to spend the next 25 or 30 minutes discussing. The first really starts with a baseline understanding, and that is the world of restaurant marketing is changing. As a matter of fact, the burden on restaurant businesses and how they manage their business and evolve is changing pretty significantly. We move on to the next slide. The market itself, of course, is becoming significantly more competitive as categories evolve and participants shift from one segment of the market to the other. Consumers are changing and growing more discerning about their choices for dining as they look to see different items on the menu, as they are essentially empowered by technology and the availability of information to make different kinds of choices based on different factors than ever before. The regulations and guidelines and industry norms that effectively dictate how restaurant businesses do their work, how they disclose information, how they plan their offerings and build guest experiences is in constant flux and under constant scrutiny. And last but certainly not least, the market in an industry where you would otherwise expect the job of delivering hospitality would remain fundamentally unchanged over long periods of time is being wholly disrupted by the emergence of technology that customers and guests are holding in their own hands. Guest-facing technology that exists in the store, but that also exists through the mobile device to empower ordering, delivery, menu availabilities, and other kinds of comparative analysis is upending an industry that, for the most part, has remained largely stable and consistent for many years in terms of how it thinks about the guest and how it thinks about marketing in general. While the restaurant industry itself undergoes this period of disruption that's unique in its history, we know too that the practice of marketing at a high level across many verticals is undergoing its own sort of paradigm shift, and that really comes down to two dynamics in particular. One is the proliferation of consumer engagement channels, and I referenced this before with respect to guest-facing technology and mobile, but the truth of the matter is over the last 2 decades, marketers have been forced to contend with an absolutely seismic shift in terms of the number of addressable channels and the obligation, really the burden, to provide for a consumer experience, offers, and messages that not just span those channels, but really are seamless and are engaged to maximize the impact of those channels appropriately. For every one of these channels, of course, and for every technology that's required to support them, there has been a corresponding rise in the creation and availability of data that goes along with it. So if channels is one of the big trends, then data, of course, is the other. It's proliferation and the broader burden upon marketers of all stripes to advance strategies to use and to take advantage of this big data revolution is significant. How companies look at this change, however, whether they see it as a challenge or an opportunity, whether they see themselves as prepared or challenged in that respect, though, varies pretty significantly. The net of it, though, just as in the case in the restaurant market, very particular, is that we're seeing a sea change in how people think about marketing and how marketing departments are looking at their own structures, their own assets, and their own resources as they tackle the challenges that they expect to emerge over tomorrow. So with that said, what we set out to do earlier this summer was learn about how sort of the intersection of these trends is actually taking shape in the restaurant business itself, and how performers of all different levels in the restaurant business are essentially planning to evolve their marketing infrastructure, evolve the way they deliver a guest experience to grow their businesses and establish what hopefully will be some breakaway velocity in a market that's very competitive and only likely to grow more competitive over the next several years. So we assembled a panel of more than 200 relatively senior thought leaders from across the restaurant industry. And we surveyed them through both an online survey and backed that up by select telephone interviews to learn more about how restaurants are thinking about these emerging trends, what they see as the fundamental pillars of growth in the business, and I think, again, most importantly, what they see as the most addressable avenues to establish competitive differentiation in this market that's otherwise very, very crowded, very competitive. Our research spanned a wide array of different restaurant segments, from quick serve all the way through fine dining. It included panelists who represent a range of different experience levels, with a little bit of weighting, I think appropriately so, towards marketers and other practitioners who bring the most experience, 15 to 25 or more years of work in the restaurant space. But I think most importantly, and you'll hear me go back to this refrain several times through the rest of the discussion, we asked our panel to benchmark their company's performance and their marketing capabilities across an understanding of what was happening elsewhere in their market. We asked panelists to self-describe themselves as either average performers, overperformers, or underperformers, and this is admittedly a bit of a subjective way of thinking about things, but we asked the panel to consider their revenue, their profit, their recent growth, and then to assign themselves as either in the top 25% of the market, the middle 50% of market participants, and then the bottom 25% of the market. And I'm glad to say that roughly speaking, our panel foots very, very closely to that distribution. About a third of our panelists describe themselves as market overperformers, leaders, folks that others could look to as role models for their own growth and development. A little bit more than half, 55% in total, saw themselves as average performers, aligned with the market in many, many other respects. And then a small percent, just about 10% of our 206 total respondents saw themselves as challenged, as underperformers. Now these distinctions on their own don't mean a whole lot, but as you'll see as we move through the rest of the content, they're actually really, really important in terms of illustrating how certain trends tend to take hold more prominently among, say, overperformers and tend to reinforce the importance of those issues, particularly in light of that general theme. What does it take to drive real lasting value, lasting competitive differentiation? So you'll hear me referring to that several times. So with that said, what did we learn? What are the developments that are key in restaurant marketing circles today, and what are the key trends that marketing leaders in this industry should keep first and foremost in their mind as they think about how their budgets need to evolve, how their organizations need to evolve, and as they think about how to interact with suppliers and partners and all sorts of different stakeholders over the next few years? Well, at a very high level, there are generally three big categories of change and dynamism that are shaping this complicated world of restaurant marketing today, as best we can see them. And certainly there are many, many more granular developments, some of which I'll describe today, and others which we explore in the paper, and no doubt others of which are too complicated, nuanced, detailed to cover in material like this. But at a high level, the dynamics that are really changing the world for many of us today come down to these categories. The first is data and insight, and there's overlapping here between some of what I discussed before, being that sort of seismic shift in marketing in general, with some of the trends that are really much more specific to restaurants in general. But the emergence of so much more available data that's specific to individual consumers, data that is anonymous and tells us quite a bit about how anonymous consumers interact, particularly across mobile touch points, data about transactions, data about individuals and their wants and needs, presents really so much opportunity for marketers who understand how to convert that raw information into insight, and then, as importantly, or more importantly, convert that insight into the kind of decision-making that generates value. That it really does need to be where we start the discussion and where we start the inquiry into where value is being created. Right on its heels, and sort of closely aligned with those macro trends I referenced before, are a series of trends that speak to the emergence of technology and new customer, new guest touch points in the marketplace. The word digital is used a lot in reference to these developments, and for obvious reasons, digital channels represent, I think, a centerpiece of how many are thinking about innovation, about thinking about the delivery of offers, the management of relationships, the optimization of that customer dialogue and value exchange over the long term. Always an additional dimension of complexity and hard work to consider in the restaurant business, where so much of the experience is fostered in a more traditional in-store environment than just in the dimension of a screen of several inches. But nevertheless, we know that technology is changing this world around us, and so thinking about which technologies are first and foremost in that development, and thinking too about where technology is already beginning to deliver value and where there are some open questions about the role that tools are going to play over the long term, I think is essential to sorting out a number of other trends that are in development. Finally, of course, the guest experience, and so much of this does come down to guest experience at the end of the day. How we're thinking about it, how guest experience relates to marketing in general and the delivery of promotions. If I were to boil all of these developments down, I would say that there's really a collision of these trends at a high level, and the most highly differentiated participants are those that build strategies that contemplate all three as part of a combined approach. But of course, many organizations are applying each of these in different ways. These are general themes, but as you'll see, many of the more granular developments foot to either or all of these developments in proper context. So that said, let's start at the very beginning, in that, particularly in that data category, because data, big data, what data can do, and all of that. These are topics that are written about and spoken about quite often, but I think for a lot of folks who are sort of on the ground and doing the hard work of building offers and building a customer base and trying to reinforce their loyalty, it can sometimes be difficult to see the linkage between simply aggregating information and then using that in a way that drives value. And so we wanted to test that first and foremost. And the good news, and I think reaffirming to those of us that work in around these thorny questions on a day-to-day basis, is that the folks who are out there doing this kind of work see an absolute and strong correlation between the development of strategies to use data and their own ability to generate competitive advantage in crowded markets. So we have plenty more granular data available for you in the paper itself, and we'll make that available as soon as this presentation is wrapped. But here's just a taste. 55% of our panel agreed strongly with the notion that effective data strategies drive competitive advantage. And for a CMO or a vice president of marketing, or a brand manager for that matter, who is thinking about pivoting their organization to embrace data more centrally, or to invest in the tools and solutions necessary to elevate the use of data to drive promotions and offers and the like, this is, I think, a hugely reaffirming conclusion, because competitive advantage is ultimately what we're after, and this linkage is really important. That 55% number, very, very strong. More importantly than that, maybe in terms of priority, are the number of folks here who simply did not agree that data is directly linked to competitive advantage. And as far as our panel is concerned, at least, that number was effectively zero, which is to say everybody sees that the deployment of strategies to use data drive value. There's a little bit of disagreement on just how much value, how much competitive advantage, but clearly the value is there, and how you go about generating it is the real question that contends that marketers are forced to contend with on a day-to-day basis. Closely related to that conclusion, if you're going to build a data strategy, there's another question we consider often, and that is the question of data centricity. Is it enough to simply have an overarching plan to use data, or does your organization, as across the board, need to be thinking about data and its various applications across essentially everything that it does? That's a lofty way of thinking about things, perhaps, and more importantly, perhaps it's perhaps not quite the reality in as many organizations as it needs to be. But just as our panel saw the development of data strategies as key to differentiation, so too did the panel see the development of a data-centric marketing culture as key to enhanced performance relative to peers. So in this case, for example, and I mentioned we'd be doing this quite frequently, we broke down our response a little bit according to the underperformers, average performers, and overperformers among our panel. And you can see there's a pretty straight, direct correlation. The overperformers are those who use data and were able to leverage it to drive value, added value, in connection with their marketing efforts. Those who aren't using data, who are relying on older and perhaps more outdated tools, branding techniques, and the like, are seeing that in their performance relative to their peers. The quick and easy takeaway here is that data equals value, equals growth. And once again, we come back down to a more important question, which is, okay, what data, what applications, and how do we do that? Because I think it's otherwise easy to assume that all you need to do is make some simple investments and that value is unlocked. And of course, the truth is much more complex than that. And as a matter of fact, I kind of look to the very, very next data point, and you can already see that when it comes to leveraging data, even though the value proposition is clear, the task of actually divining insight and then making better business decisions based on it is not so simple, in fact, at all. So even though there's huge confidence in what it can do, only 27% of our panel across the board say they have a deep understanding of who their guests are based on the data at their disposal. And not quite half that number, just 12% of our panel, said that they're able to leverage data to drive an understanding of how guests engage with their brand. Those are relatively small numbers when you think about it. When you think about the wealth of information that's now available, the fact that so many channels today are essentially developing or generating data as one of their fundamental outputs, the fact that there's still such a huge gulf between that which is usable and that which is essentially being used to drive insights, it's a challenge, absolutely. But I think it's also a huge opportunity for folks who are looking to get a better handle on who their guests are and how their interactions across both their promotional touch points and in the walls of their retail stores need to change in kind. One of the reasons I suspect that there's such a gulf here is because marketers are largely very inconsistent in terms of the actual data that they're using, that they're out there collecting about who their guest audiences are. And this is a question that gets answered in very different ways across different segments of the marketplace, different types of restaurants, that is, and across different performance cohorts. But our big picture takeaway is that in general, when we ask about a variety of different data types, most restaurants are either not collecting types of data, or they're collecting types of data very, very inconsistently. So again, a complex question, which we have not repeated in full here, but to give you a bit of a taste, in general, our panel said that they had a fairly solid understanding of their guest's email address, some understanding of their demographics, which is to say their basic personal identifiers, age, gender, what have you, and slightly less even so about their history of redeeming offers and promotions. At the other side of the equation, they had very, very limited understanding of their guests' interactions, say, on social media or digital media, where you can learn so much about an audience. A shockingly little understanding of their guests' physical address. And physical address, of course, tells us a lot about proximity to a retail store, which tells us so much about potential propensity to visit that retail store, and relatively little likewise about media consumption. And if you don't understand much about media consumption, how to plan and optimize an advertising and a marketing plan based upon where those audiences are spending their time. The fact remains, though, that across the board, and you see this is a question essentially we asked on a scale of 1 to 5, the responses were fairly low across the board, which tells us that there's so much room to grow, so much room to both collect more data and to derive better value from the data resources that are being aggregated. Closely related to that, if marketers are challenged in terms of the types of data that they're actually collecting, it may be in large part because their level of confidence in their own capabilities, their own very basic data-driven marketing capabilities, is also lagging to a great extent. And so we asked our panel to weigh in on how they saw their own assets and their own competencies across a wide range of different data-driven marketing tasks. And what we've repeated here are the top 3 that came back on an aggregate basis across our panel. And as you can see on a scale of 1 to 5, the response was relatively lukewarm. As a matter of fact, the only function of data-driven marketing where restaurant marketers feel they're generally competent, if not necessarily well-versed, comes down to measuring results, where they across the board they register only lukewarm confidence. In other key functions, segmenting their guest audiences, predicting guest dining behavior so that they can offer the right kinds of offers and promotions, the performance lags pretty significantly. You see, too, here we broke out the data a little bit according to our underperformer, average performer, and overperformer segments, because as you might expect, best performers in the markets are those that very naturally have the best handle on the key functions of these marketing tasks. That in itself is not surprising. What was much more surprising to us is that there is such a gulf between what could be possible and where the performance of even the market leaders is today. And with that, I'm going to pause because I think this is our first interactive poll moment. Is that right, Heidi?
That's right. That's right. Thanks for passing it over. So we have our first poll here, and like I said, this is anonymous, and we're just making this a little more interactive. So here's the first question. If 9% of the respondents said that their brand is extremely data-driven today, what percentage do you all think expect to be so in 2 years? So those are the options below. Just pick one, and we'll give people a chance to give what they think their response is. All right, and now we're gonna, last 2 seconds, okay, I'm gonna close it up and share the results with you all.
Okay, so 9% of our panel said their brand is extremely data-driven now, a relatively small number, I think we could all agree. But our panel says that they expect 41% think that it will be so in 2 years. So our panel is expecting a pretty significant amount of investment and effort focused on data-oriented marketing over the next 2 years, and a significant bump in terms of the number of the panel who see themselves as extremely data-driven. Well, that's pretty good response, but perhaps not too surprisingly, as we flip back to the actual data, the number that our survey actually revealed was higher. As a matter of fact, it's a majority of our panel, 52% of panelists in general, expect that their company is going to be extremely data-driven 24 months from now, up from less than 10% of the panel. Now, this is a significant shift. This is a kind of shift that tells us that these trends we've been discussing to date, the understanding of data as a driver of competitive advantage, frustration with data collection and with lack of sophistication around some of the basic blocking and tackling work around marketing in the 21st century, has registered on the radar of CMOs and senior leaders in restaurant marketing functions. And what it tells us likewise is that the shift to remedy those challenges, to invest full on in what it takes to be more guest-centric and using data as a lever for that, is full on. So much so that that the proportion of the market that's really going to embrace this kind of insight and change their business in the process is really significant. That should be heartening for all of us. It should be, especially those of us that spend a lot of our time thinking about where that innovation is going to come from. It should also be if not a warning sign, then certainly a call to those who are tasked with keeping up in this crowded marketplace, that their work is going to get significantly more challenging over the next few years, but also I think present a lot of opportunities for change. At the center of that development, I think, comes down to a series of use cases, a series of applications where marketers are going to need to be focusing more of their time and effort in establishing a clear value proposition and establishing a series of processes, protocols, tools in order to get in line with and then ultimately ahead of their direct competitors. So here, for example, we asked our panel to tell us more about what their fundamental data-driven marketing priorities, their tasks would be over the next few years. And I think, again, the first big takeaway is that as usual, the overperformers are the ones that are going to be most focused on new kinds of investment and new initiatives, and underperformers don't quite see the urgency there. At the same time, some of these basic tasks that you would expect the market would be fundamental to the market are going to be priority one. Delivering personalized messages across channels, first and foremost. Looking at guest audiences, come from many, many different backgrounds, can be categorized according to many, many demographic, psychographic, and behavioral categories, segmenting them into actionable segments for follow-up, and then doing a better job with analytics of predicting guest behaviors and then matching the offers so that you find those right audiences at the right time for the right kinds of products. Absolutely enormously critical priorities, sort of central to better use of data over the next few years. And I think we have another poll here, don't we, Heidi?
That's right, yep. So poll number 2 here. Okay. It says, of the types of data below, which one did the majority of respondents say would be the most helpful in providing insights? So if you guys want to go ahead and take a guess, which one you think? All right. A couple more seconds here. All right, I'm going to close this out.
Lots of moving pieces.
Here are the results. Kind of surprising, actually.
Okay, so our attendees today tell us that the data type that's going to do the most to advance these use cases, do the most to provide the kind of insights they need to actually make decisions, is guest-provided preference data. What do we need? What do we want? How do we want to react? One of our top categories, but once again, our panel is just slightly misaligned with our attendees today. Slightly misaligned. In fact, our panel told us that it's promotional response and offer redemption data. How are our campaigns working? How are our efforts to segment, to test offers across different segments of our addressable guest audience? How are they delivering value to the bottom line? Being able to establish the correlation between spend, tactical initiatives, and actual results, our panel said was going to be first and foremost. When you got past that type of data, the panel was a little bit more fragmented in terms of their preferences. In fact, this is a question that's probably best addressed by taking a look at the paper, because we actually asked about quite a number of different data types. But as you can see, 40%, for example, wanted to get a handle on online and behavioral data as an indicator of potential interest in offers. 37% simply said they needed more and better CRM data, name, contact information, basic background on their audience. 35%, nearly as many, that's where our panel endorsed the guest-provided preferences and said that kind of direct linkage between the guests, what they want, and how they can respond is really important. The net as well is that at a certain level, marketers told us they want all sorts of data, and that for every type of data there is a potential application out there that's appropriate. The challenge isn't necessarily getting the data. It's about building the protocols and the processes and the pipes to use that data, and that's in line with the way that their business objectives demand. And with that said, I think we have one final poll.
That's right. One last poll. Okay. So this one is, what is the #1 channel respondents said their brand would likely increase spending on in the next 2 years?
There are lots of channels out there, and lots of channels that continue to grow at very fast pace. So I expect on this one we'll see a variety of different responses.
All right. I'm going to give it a couple more seconds. Everybody got their question in? All right, and close and share. Okay,
so here, well, a little bit less variety perhaps than in some of the other questions. There's a lot of consistency around mobile apps being the center of the spending focus for our marketer friends in the restaurant business over the next few years. And in this case, I am glad to say that our audience today got it right. In fact, it got it right even in slightly lesser numbers than our research panel, because they said much the same things. And when confronted with a pretty significant number of potential technologies, potential channels, and the like, the app opportunity came up loud and clear over and over again. 70% of our panel endorsed loyalty and promotion apps. 59% endorsed mobile ordering and payment apps. And then, looking at more deeply, then that's where we began to consider other sorts of guest-facing technologies. But in general, a pretty significant degree of agreement across the industry that the mobile device, primarily through the app, really does represent a center of commerce and awareness as a venue for delivering offers and promotions. So much in the same way that we traditionally thought of paid advertising channels, broadcast, print, and what have you, but also an opportunity to sort of open the door and the guest experience itself, which is really so very critical in ways that I imagine we still haven't begun to devise. If you think about the many things that the mobile device can do in terms of making for a more interactive experience. Along with these guest-facing technologies, we know that the marketing mix itself in the restaurant business, just as in other verticals, is changing in some really substantial ways. And so we asked our panel to weigh in on what channels they saw as capturing share in their media mix and losing share. Now, the high level feedback here, the headline, if you will, is that perhaps not shockingly, digital channels are forefront in this transformation. And so, for example, 90% of our panel said they're going to be growing their spending on display advertising via social, Facebook advertising, for example, Twitter advertising, over the next 2 years. 0%, no panelists told us they expect to cut their spending on that channel. That's a pretty significant distinction. When they think about social media content, the focal point in managing their own communities, fostering a loyal base of clients. Not exactly paid advertising, but nevertheless important platforms for businesses that are so much about the experience. 85% of the panel going to increase your spending and your effort on that channel. Once again, 0% of the panel saying they're pulling back from that channel. You dig even deeper into that, and we look at some of the more established advertising focus. 75% going to spend more on their own company's website to try to enhance that experience, make it more consistent and aligned with their other touch points. We finally begin to register some folks who say, I'm going to be pulling back some spend, but only 1% in this category. 73% up on the mobile apps, likewise a nominal 1%. Email, a channel that's been growing significantly for years and that's been established for many marketers for a year. We still see 56% of the market saying that spending is going up year over year, a pretty significant amount when you really think about it. Only 8% intending to decline their spend on that sort of fundamental engagement channel. The picture changes a little bit, though, as you might imagine, when we begin to incorporate more traditional media channels into the mix. And the story isn't necessarily one of decline across the board, but here you begin to see a more balanced mix of folks who are looking to grow their spend versus those who say, you know what, these are the more traditional means that are going to serve to fund the growth that we see in our emergent vehicles. So, for example, in radio, a traditional acquisition channel, 22% up, but 26% are going to cut their spend. 18% up in television, which still, commands enormous reach and is part of the media plan for so much of this industry. But 22% say that share is going down. 15% up on the direct mail side compared to 24%. We're now really seeing the effects of traditional media and its lack of impact, but none more so than with respect to traditional print advertising. Magazines and newspapers, historically so fundamental to growing local audiences in the restaurant market more so than any other, but going forward to 2018, only 6% of the restaurant market says that their spend's going up, 34% going down, and the rest presumably holding steady right at the middle. Lots of changes. You can see the clear impact of digital here. You can see the impact of channels that are driven by data, and you can see the effort of restaurants across the board to put themselves in the media channels where their customers are, and critically those where they think that they can deliver the most engaging, impactful, dynamic guest experiences possible. And that kind of brings us to the last, I think, big picture data takeaway from this effort. And it really does speak to that question of guest experience itself, because what our panel told us, both through their quantitative data, through their anecdotal response, and it's just a general priority that their businesses are wrestling with, is the need to begin sort of collapsing the way they have traditionally thought about promotional marketing and the way that they have thought about managing for the in-store experience into a hybrid, and to essentially living up to the promise of guest centricity by managing these efforts through what are increasingly coming to be known as omni-channel strategies that are more or less blind to the delivery channel that gets chosen at the end of the day, but rely on insights into who our guests are, how they behave, what they want, and what they respond to as the centerpiece of essentially all kinds of decision making. For most of our panel, omnichannel and guest-centric ultimately come down to improving the guest experience in-store through these marketing touch points, on the mobile device, when they're sitting at the table, when they're waiting for a table, essentially at every single conceivable touch point. That is what marketing is becoming increasingly, and marketing is becoming all about experience, no matter where they are. For slightly lesser components or portions of our panel, the priorities are all around data itself and leveraging it to drive more targeted experiences, more relevant experiences, and for a not insignificant portion. It's about loyalty as well, and loyalty, again, so closely tied in to the notion of experience, of value exchange between guest and between restaurant business, that it's easy to see why. Ultimately, I think this is all really, really good news for the marketer, because it puts a marketer in an elevated position relative to where they are. The restaurant marketer is no longer sort of the chief advertising or the chief offers department. Instead, they're the director of guest experience at a really strategic level, and they're in charge of both identifying the guests, bringing them in the front door, making sure that there is a solid and a meaningfully valuable relationship for all parties to that, and then for growing that relationship over time. And for marketers who may occasionally get tired of the day-to-day grind of managing channels and doing the tactical work of marketing, the notion of their role elevating to that of a real strategist or a real key part of the business, whether yours is a small business or a franchise global business with many, many locations, I think it's empowering one way or the other, and a great platform for folks to be thinking about as they consider how their budgets are going to evolve and how their internal organizations need to evolve over the next few years. So that sort of takes us to the last piece of our discussion today, and that is essentially, what do we do about all these trends, right? So we know that data is playing a disruptive role. We know that technology and new channels are upending old ways of doing things in ways that seem to evolve, week to week, if not month to month, right? And we know that experience needs to be factored more significantly into promotions and everything else that at one other time was siloed or divorced from those efforts. But how do you go about embarking upon that kind of change if you find yourself, say, in the underperformer category, or you're squarely amongst the market performers and looking for a way to break out and capitalize on these trends? Well, the fact of the matter is there is no one-size-fits-all solution for everyone. Everyone is going to see their own opportunities and have to consider their own obstacles in ways that are independent for their business. But we think that there is a process to this kind of growth and this kind of transformative change that has worked for many in the past, and that can work for you if you consider it into its various components. The first sort of begins with what we're saying is decide on the optimal menu for your business. That is to say, understand the options that are at your disposal. Understand and try to identify as succinctly as possible what your business is looking to accomplish strategically and how your marketing initiatives, activities, objectives are tied in to supporting those. It's very, very common in the marketing landscape, again, across markets today, for marketers to spend their time and effort trying to substantiate their investment in various channels without thinking at all about the relationship between those channels, their appropriate use cases, and what the business is attempting to accomplish at a high level. And so starting at this very basic point, considering what's available, what's necessary to accomplish, what your key objectives are going to be, and then how to go about doing them is a really critical, important starting point for all organizations. Once you know what's going to be on the menu, what your options are, before you even go through the task of figuring out how you're going to tackle them, then the focus changed from the menu itself to, if you will, the ingredients. As you sort out the assets that are at your disposal, the tools that you have, both technology as well as the human resources, the talent, the people that are going to drive this transformation, and begin to make some in some cases very difficult judgment calls around where you're strong and perhaps where you're gapped. Likewise, this is an area where we see organizations tend to make hasty decisions or make no decisions at all because they start with assumptions about what they have to work with. But understanding more, for example, about what data you have, the role of the technologies that you're engaging with, the kind of bandwidth or expertise that your agency partners or your other marketing suppliers bring to the table, whether you have staff that bring the right talent, expertise, capability to the table, and what have you. if you don't understand where you're gapped, where you're strong, where you perhaps may need to realign assets, it's very, very difficult to go about the rest of the work that you have at your disposal. This is candidly difficult for a lot of organizations to do, but it's so absolutely critical. It is also one of those areas where we tend to support our clients pretty significantly, because having an informed third-party voice from any one of your business partners, for that matter, can provide a lot of value in that respect. Once you've sorted out what ingredients are at your disposal, you've done your shopping, then it's time to go and prepare for that change, to begin assessing the kinds of needs, the kinds of change that you need to make in your organization. That could be a process change, breaking down traditional silos, for example, in your organization that differentiated different marketing channels, functions, geographies, corporate versus franchise marketing, and the like. It could be establishing new specs for technology or suppliers, and it begins to essentially establish the foundation for other changes that that will happen in the years ahead. It is likewise an enormously complex undertaking, and in many respects, this forms the basis of strategic reinvention. Now you get into the work of guest-centric, omni-channel marketing strategy, just to throw a few buzzwords at you, that really do represent sort of the guts of what all these trends are all about. Once you begin to develop those strategy itself, then it's time to reach out to the stakeholders in your organization and to begin to prepare them for the changes ahead. So there are what we consider back of the house or infrastructure partners that need to be part of that transformation. The agencies, data providers, tech developers, consultancies, your business partners, the other folks that provide you with assets but also help you get marketing programs, campaigns, and guest experiences out the door that need to be brought into this process and need to understand what their role is going to be in your new paradigm, in your new data-driven paradigm. They need roles. They need to figure out how their relationships work with one another if this is ever going to be a success. You also, of course, need to bring your internal stakeholders into the fold, your front-of-the-house teammates, your marketing teams, the folks who are managing your stores and the guest experience across every single touch point, the folks who have a direct line of sight to your guests, so that they understand what your priorities are going to be, how their processes are going to need to evolve, and what kind of feedback and feed forward, if you will, you're going to need from them over the next few years. Transformative change, of course, doesn't happen without everybody being engaged in that process. I think a lot of people assume that preparing these internal stakeholders is the first priority, when the fact of the matter is that they tend to be more successfully engaged at the very end of the process once the rest of the infrastructure is built. When you've done all of that foundation laying, then finally you can get the check, if you will. You can finally put the process in motion and begin establishing your protocols and your process to leverage data, technology, and new media in ways that are going to be consistent and business as usual over the long term. That's where culture begins, right? That's where the work of aligning folks with these new imperatives and with these new assets over the long term can begin to take form, and you can begin thinking about continuous innovation, continuous change being the centerpiece of your effort, rather than having to contend with difficult and unfortunate questions like, why are we falling behind? Why are our competitors outperforming us? Or what do we need to do to get over this monumental hurdle that we have ahead of us? So much of this transformation is founded upon the need to not have to do that in the future, but to be on a marketing and a guest experience trajectory that has real scalability and adaptability over the long term. And certainly I think the broader promise of data as well as technology is to do exactly that. For folks that live and work in a world that is all about guest experience at the end of the day, I think that's a pretty empowering development, and so a really good uplifting trend, I think, to come away from our research. So much more that we learned in our effort. And of course, it's all available for you to peruse at your convenience in our white paper, which is now available. And I'll flip it back to Heidi, who can tell you more about where to get it.
Excellent. Thanks so much, Jonathan, and thanks to everybody for spending all this time with us today. I hope you found it informative. In the handout section of the GoToWebinar panel, you can see that we have uploaded the report itself, and the webinar presentation that we just gave is right there. If you don't have time to download that right now, don't worry. Like I said, we will be emailing you tomorrow with a link to both of those documents, as well as a recorded version of this webinar if you'd like to listen to it again or pass it around to colleagues. That will be in your inbox tomorrow. So thanks again for joining us, everybody, and have a great day.